Sometimes I work with somebody in therapy who's so resistant to the process that my only goal for the therapy to begin with is to give them a positive experience in therapy. I'll show you fucking card tricks. It's like I'll do whatever I need to do for that particular person if it's going to give you a pleasant experience with this process so we can get going. It's a matter of just where do we even fucking start?
It starts right here, deep in your heart. Start right here. Oh, that's where it starts. Right here. We look to your heart. It's always and only starting right here.
Tom Rutledge and Dr. Alan Berger bring over 90 years of clinical experience to this important podcast, and they offer you a guarantee. You will gain something of personal value from each episode. And now, what matters most.
It starts right here. Start right here.
Welcome back to Start Right Here. I'm Tom Rutledge. With me is my partner in crime, Dr. Alan Berger. And our wonderful producer, Patrick Newman, who's been a big part of this ongoing conversation. And last week we had Dr. Michael McGee on, and we're having such a good time with him and learning so much. We asked him to come back. It seemed like he might have some things to contribute to our conversation that we've been having off and on here since all of the political unrest in this year, beginning with January 6th, just talking about what do we do? How might we contribute to healing the nation? It's easy to talk about that, but how to do that. And then we kind of took that conversation a little bit farther into talking with family members and friends, loved ones that are polar or different positions than we are. And I think it turns out Michael has some things to say about that and has dealt with some of that himself. And I think you guys, since we last met, Patrick, you and Michael have had some conversation about that. So maybe there's some of that you guys can bring into us. But that's why we have. Besides the fact that he's just a fun guy, Michael McGee back with us again. So, but first, how are you doing, Alan?
Well, I just come back from Palm Desert.
Yes.
I had a small vacation. We rented a place with a pool, and so I've been sitting in the sun and jumping in the pool and playing some tennis, and a happy man right now. I had a great time, and I had recharged the battery a lot. And, I'm really, really, really glad to be here, and I was really looking forward to this episode. Michael, the discussion we had last time, I think, was really, really powerful because you're giving people a way of taking a look at themselves and in a way that they can suspend that judgment, and that's such a challenge. I mean, I've seen it so many times. Like, I'll never forget this one guy that would come to therapy with his wife. And there was a part of him that really, really wanted to try to improve the relationship with her. And the challenge is that he had so much difficulty holding on to himself when she was complaining about some of the things that were missing for her in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And so he'd come into therapy, and it's always an interesting thing to me. And not that this isn't part of a solution, but he'd say, do we have to come in and talk about these problems all the time? And, when his wife is saying, well, look, I don't like paying Dr. Berger all this money to just tell you how wonderful you are. I mean, I could do that at home and not have to pay these exorbitant fees, right? I'd much rather sit. But in his head, it was so hard to be able to integrate that, right? And to be able to say, and one of the things I say to people all the time when they're in that position, I said, look, in many ways, it's great news that she's still complaining to you. And then a guy always looks at me and said, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what do you mean that's good news? I said, because it means she hasn't given up. You see, she's still hopeful that there's a way to find a connection, albeit she might be able to do this with what Gottman called a softer startup, right? Where he talked about the soft startup. But I said, but you can also sidestep that. You don't have to be dependent on what she's saying and saying, look, when she's bringing these things up to me, it means I'm important to her. and that what's missing is really painful for her. And sometimes that reframe can help. Now, I can't say it's worked all the time, but there's times when, because look, it is true, right? Because we are important to our partners. If something's missing, they want to turn to us, which is what I want. I want my wife to turn to me when she's struggling with something that's missing. And, sometimes I'm more available for that than others, especially when I'm feeling better. Like right now, my wife, when I come out of this session, she can tell me whatever she wants to tell me. I'm feeling great. My battery's recharged.
All right, I'm texting Jess right now. It's like,
I take it back.
This is an excellent time to talk to Alan about.
Hey, remember that resentment you shared with me?
That's right.
But anyway, so look, this dialogue that we want to get into today about, like, what do we do to deal with these incredible polarizations? It's like we've gone through the Civil War again. Families are divided like I've never seen in my lifetime, and that I imagined back when the North and South were in war. There was these families where one person would be on the Northern Army and the other person would be on the Southern Army. And, how did these families heal those kinds of wounds, right? So, Michael, I'd love to hear your beginning thoughts about this, and then we'll kick it around together.
Well, it's great to be here with you all again. Thank you for letting me join you. It's so funny. I really relate to what you're saying about judgment and in a couple situation, really when our partner asks something of us, right, and they we can so quickly to not sort of judge that as a bad situation or that we're bad because they want something from us that we're not giving them. So I had a hike today with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how a lot of that what's going on is this judging of each other, and we have to be kind as we do this because we all do it. We all judge. So one of the things to start off right off the bat is that as we begin to look at this is to not judge our judging. That I just want to start with that is judging happens. We're all batting each other and ourselves all the time. And we shouldn't hate ourselves for hating. We shouldn't judge ourselves for judging. These are just things that come up. I personally, in terms of this political thing, that was about 2 months ago, and our neighbors in the neighborhood had a block party, and everybody got together. And a lot of our neighbors we live in a neighborhood which is not diverse. It's more upper white, middle class, retired executive type people. And a lot of them happen to be more conservative. And so we went to this party, and everybody was a lot of the people were inside the garage. It was a potluck party, and everybody was gathered in the garage, and none of them were wearing masks. And there was this one guy in there with a Trump Pence shirt on, and I freaked out. I was like, these people are insane. These are intelligent, successful people. What are they doing? This is reckless. This is they could be committing potential manslaughter. And I went into such a judging place of mind. So I just want to start with that by saying that I have been struggling with my own judgmentalness on this. I'm not a liberal. I'm a nothing. I think the biggest problem that I see with all of this is that we other each other and we make each other into categories. Racism, right? And then there's politicism now, and then there's nationalism, and then there's religionism. We're always cutting each up into categories, and we're doing that with politics now in a way that is profoundly destructive. I mean, I think over time, othering other people and tribalism, maybe that was really evolutionarily adaptive for us for the past maybe 50,000 years or so, as we've seen the rise and fall of empires and competitiveness and all that. So I can see how othering others has been beneficial maybe, but at a great cost in terms of human suffering. But now for us to be othering each other, the way that we are politically is really leading to a degradation of our society. And I must imagine that the Chinese and the Russians are just absolutely delighted to see the way that things like the polarization of media and social disinformation and the politically driven nature of the way that we're fed different kind of information and the demonization that we have of each other now that I myself have participated in, I'm afraid. So I have a far right-wing brother, and I sent him a piece by Rebecca Solnit that was entitled something about, I think it was on not meeting the Nazis halfway. And boy, that was like stirring up a hornet's nest when I did that. I had no idea when I sent it to my family the kind of response that I was going to get from my brother Mark. And Mark he just really, really reacted and I think on my part to do that was very unskillful because I had no idea what I was doing and creating.
What was her thesis, Michael? What was her point she was making in her?
Basically, Rebecca Solnit is a very good writer, but what she's saying is that basically she equated in some ways the right with Nazis. And she equated conservative people with being maybe racist or sexist or xenophobic or misogynist or homophobic or transphobic, all these things. And it's just not true. I thought, when I went back and reread it, it may be true that conservative people are more prone to being that way, but there's a lot of wonderful, loving conservative people. And I noticed that I have some of my values are conservative. I think that she made a good point that you really don't want to compromise on core values that have to do with what I would call love-based values. I agree with her on that. You don't want to compromise and say, okay, it's okay to hate, it's okay to harm, it's okay to cut people off and dehumanize them. Her point about that was very, very good. But casting that in terms of a left-right just further adds to this sort of narrative of one side being bad and the other side being good. And my brother was very clear that he really sees liberals as really I think the narrative is that the right feels hurt by the liberals who call them racists and all that kind of thing, and they see the liberals as wanting to take away their freedom and wanting to force a sort of a collectivism on them, which deprives them of their rights and their individualism. And so, my computer is doing funny things. And so anyway, really getting beyond those kinds of narratives is really important. So I went back and I found a couple of organizations, braverangels.org and betterarguments.org, that are facilitating dialogues between each other. And I realized, we had a conservative couple over, some friends of ours named Gary and Charla, and they're quite conservative. And so we engaged in this wonderful talk about politics, and we kind of came up with each other that it was so important to sort of set some ground rules. And I'm sort of harking back to St. Francis of Assisi. And, in his prayer, he said, "It is better to love than to be loved, and it is better to understand than to be understood." Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, that's a good place to start. And maybe if we had this genuine desire on each other's part to truly and deeply understand each other, and then maybe if we started by wanting to seek to understand before we judge. When I was doing clinical work at a methadone clinic, one of the things we used to always talk about with these challenging patients was the issue of contempt prior to investigation. Contempt prior to investigation. And we had to sort of exercise sort of a clinical discipline to really, because people would come in with all sorts of provocative stuff that they'd done. And sure, a lot of times they were behaving in destructive and unskillful ways, but you don't start out with contempt prior to investigating what's going on. And I think there's a lot of that that's going on now in families and in our country.
You know, one of the things is we get our blinders on, and and I think the problem we're talking about religion or politics or nationalism or anything else, it's exclusivity. It's not what you believe. It's that as you believe that it's not enough that I be right, but that you must be wrong. I have a friend in Texas that I went to college with a long time ago, and I would say pretty liberal, and when during the election, when the results were coming in, I live in rural Tennessee, so it's like, this we're voting for Trump, we're voting Republican here. It's like but she sent me something about the little markers of where the election was going, and she said, these aren't your people. But I had as a humorous response, but then I realized and actually realized it was true. I said, they are, but that's the weird thing is they are when I go to Walmart. Because these are the people I'm hanging out with and thoroughly enjoying at what I call the general store. These are the ones that I'm in the line with, especially with COVID, when, the few times I go out, and most of them have masks on, we get there, and that this is our, social life. It's like, I love these people, and every now and then the conversation launches into something that I'm uncomfortable with. And I realize I don't want to go there with that person, because it's going to disrupt my love for this person. But the idea was, it's like, how can we hold on to that bigger picture? Because these are good people. It's like, and I believe they believe the same thing about me.
Are they okay? And I'm thinking about this in the context of myself as well. Mm-hmm. Are they good to you, or are they good to me? But are they also good to that gay person or that black? Or thank you, Patrick. No, I'm saying that's a good way to describe that. No, my subjective response and interaction with these people is they're good people. It's like, truth is, if we start looking at value systems and things like that, then we're going to have all kinds of disagreements. And then we also get into the murky mess of looking at, what we do in therapy, which is understanding, how did you get to be there? Because whatever we believe, we came by it honestly. And somehow we have to be able to have a conversation where some of us will be open to, and if you have open conversation, sometimes we're going to be in the uncomfortable situation of changing our mind about some things.
Let's hope so. I mean, it's really good, I think, to sort of just assume we're wrong. We don't know how we're wrong.
Investigation before contempt, right? I really like that. And did your investigation of your brother reveal anything as you started to kind of unpack the difference? And is there anything you could speak to about that?
Well, I think he has a lot of good points. I think. I watched this movie called Trump Card. Have you guys seen Trump Card?
Mm-mm.
It's basically a really political sort of documentary, if you will, by a very right wing Dinesh D'Souza, who I guess was committed and convicted actually, and then Trump pardoned him. So Dinesh D'Souza, and his portrayal. They really see the liberals as really as a threat, and I could sort of see that there's sort of like this dialectic, like collectivism versus individualism, right? There's some need for a balancing of that dialectic between those two. So I was able to see that from Mark's point of view, that he feels real threatened and feels that liberals are just impractical, and he's this fear of socialism, and that they'll just take everybody's, that we'll have Lenin and Stalin again, and just really, really, really extreme stuff. And so I just saw a lot of fear and mistrust, and that was really, really helpful to see. But I think, I think that this issue around needing to be right, is really a problem. And again, I think that links to, we're so uncomfortable with uncertainty. We want to have a worldview, and the idea that our way of seeing things may be wrong is extraordinarily anxiety provoking. That we like certainty and we like simplicity. And then I came across this piece in Scientific American on brain scans that were done on liberals and conservatives and looking at sort of psychological testing of liberals and conservatives. And I came up with this realization that conservative and liberal brains are different from each other. And people who are more conservative, they like things to be black and white. They're not comfortable with ambiguity or shades of gray or paradox. They're not. And they're more phobic about novelty and risk taking. They're more conservative brain wants things to sort of stay the same and very, very hesitant about change. Where a liberal brain is more interested in novelty and experimentation and sort of nuance and shades of gray. And I just think it's striking that we have evolved from us. You know, when I took social biology when I was at Stanford, I learned that these kinds of traits, like these sort of neurotypes that we have, that these are evolved for a reason. Nature has evolved us to have these different kinds of populations with different kinds of brains, that there's an intelligence to this. So the conservatives and the liberals need each other. And if we had that kind of understanding that there's a dynamic tension and that one would be a disaster without the other, then I think there would be a lot more mutual respect. If that were the case. And the other thing I had a realization of is, you know, nobody chooses their brain, right? Nobody makes a decision about how your brain constructs reality. And nobody chooses whether they have a liberal or a conservative brain. And so we need to have some compassion and understanding that the way that people construct reality and the way that they process reality is something that's not of their choice. So I don't know. I mean, I think that we can manage, our neurobiology and our predispositions. I think there's some principles like just being respectful to each other and seeking to understand each other, and not demanding that another person change their mind, but just acknowledging what's sort of valid and validating each other. People love to be validated, and seeking to really base decisions on agreed upon facts, because we really have a virus of misinformation in our society right now, which is really probably the greatest threat to our democracy.
Well, you just used a word that Alan uses a lot, and I use it more since I've been hanging out with the guy. It goes to the emotional sobriety principles that we talk about here. It's like, and the word was demand. It's like, you know, we talk about demand versus preferences. There has to be room for everybody. I mean, it's like, and I'm not making an argument, and I appreciate, and Patrick, you kind of hold me to task when it becomes like, I'm not arguing for, you know, certain things that there are certain things I believe that are wrong in terms of the morality of how we treat people, but I'm looking for a way sort of into the solution. And one of those has to be, we have to let go of having a demand that somebody is going to think differently than they are.
It's such an interesting discussion, this thing, because the struggles of this are manifested at all kinds of levels. You know, it's funny, we started off this conversation about talking about a couple. So every relationship, in my opinion, when the people are having a conflict, a couple are having a conflict, it's always negotiating how much togetherness versus separateness that they can tolerate in a relationship.
Yes.
So then when you start going up to this, let's say you start to rise up, and you start to look at this in terms of the bigger picture, like society or politics and stuff. Well, aren't we talking about a similar conflict? You know, you couched it in terms of collectivism versus individualism. Yeah. And, you know, our society, our culture was founded on a strong defiance to England. We were saying, you aren't going to tell us what to do. You aren't going to impose your ideas on how we are and your taxes, and we're not going to put up with it. So this country was born out of this defiance of, we're going to be our own people. Nobody's going to tell us what to do. Well, you can't just have a society that's focused on individualism. Like you said, Michael, if you get two narcissists together in a relationship and it's all about them, they have a hell of a relationship, man. It just doesn't work. You've got one person who's, demanding what they want, and usually another person trying to find a way to cooperate. But, look, in a healthy relationship, there's room for both people to say what they want, to stand for what they want. What do we talk about, Tom? Room enough for two, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We see in a healthy relationship, there's room enough for two. That takes a hell of a lot of work to get people mature enough, differentiated enough to be able to embrace a consciousness that enhances that kind of a connection. I just pulled up that website because I love, learning about new things. And so that Arguing Better, the Better Arguments Project. So first of all, they say the 3 dimensions of arguing better is, first of all, put everything in a historical context. They say today's civic arguments are rooted in history. Arguments, being able to reckon with the differences and forge joint solutions are critical to a healthy American civil life. Well, we all believe that. Just like a couple has to find a way to use their conflict to forge a better connection. We know that's possible. That conflict in a relationship isn't necessarily bad. It can help people get closer together if they meet it and they digest the conflict in the right way. The second thing is bring emotional intelligence, which they say a better argument is one in which all participants use emotional intelligence, understanding why the other party has taken a certain stance rather than immediately negating the other person's position. So this goes back to what we were saying before. And then the third one is they say you got to recognize when there is a power differential. So that's the context they want to put that in. But here's their 5 principles. Take winning off the table, prioritize relationships over than being right and wrong, and listen passionately, pay attention to context, embrace vulnerability, and make room to transform. I mean, my God, that's good couples therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, when I hear Tom talking about what he tries to do in relationship therapy and what I try to do in relationship therapy. So all I'm saying is that to me, the struggle is we're still an incredibly immature society.
One of the things that I've been noticing for years and years, and long before what's going on right now, began writing about how the very principles of what we do in therapy apply to all relationships across the board, including national and global politics. And, and so as I'm listening, as we're all talking about all this, I mean, it's just overwhelming, the problems that have not been successfully addressed. And what's the key when we're in therapy? The key is communication. That's where we always are focusing. We're going, even if it's just an individual, because we're focusing on the intrapersonal communication. What are the various aspects of yourself thinking with that? And that's part of, and I have, I have a short download on my website called Therapy for Politics that is just about that. And one of the main things is if we can just, it's not about going for the big problems to be solved, but it's about how do we begin a communication? How can we think about things that and what I always, and you and I have talked about this, Alan, well, we each have our own language about it, but we do the same thing. I ask for couples to I say, I'm always listening for points of agreement. Let's find out what we have in common. You were referring to that too, Michael. It's like where do we agree? And it's like, for me, a lot of times the communication stuff and the stuff I've written about politics is, can we agree that what we want is to solve problems?
Yeah, well, what I was going to suggest is, if we take the relationship counseling analogy to its logical conclusion, I mean, how much progress is attainable if both participants in the counseling, aren't willing to agree on that, those battlefield conditions?
See, it's not agreeing on the battlefield conditions. It's more about, does the other person's position cross a line that you're no longer willing to tolerate. So, see, it's not that we're saying that we just got to be able to embrace. Look, the folks, thank God, there was a group of people in before World War II in the United States that said, there's a danger over there with Hitler. And if we don't get involved in this, and listen, there were a lot of people that were still advocating for isolationism,
Right.
and for us not to get involved in the war. In fact, when that vote went about the Lend-Lease program to Britain, went before the Senate, he was scared to death that he was going to lose that.
Mm-hmm.
That Lindbergh had been so active in promoting an isolationism and in downplaying the threat in terms of Germany and Hitler, partly because, Lindbergh had a lot of friends over in Berlin and was connected in so many ways over there. So he didn't assess it in the same way that people that weren't somehow invested in that relationship. That vote went to the Senate. 38 people out of the Senate still voted to not get involved in World War II, to not start loaning equipment to England to prevent Germany from being able to conquer England. I mean, that's, to me, when I look back at that, it's a mind blower on my part. Now, when we look at it, were they wrong? Oh, yes. Did we have to get involved? There is no question we had to get involved. Hitler was evil. In the way that he was looking at people and talk about othering people, I call it, he made people that were outside of his world so he could do whatever he wanted to them because they weren't people.
When it comes to acknowledging everyone's opinion, rather than respecting everyone's opinion or all opinions, because I don't think all
opinions are created equal. Every argument needs to be judged on the merits. I really liked Michael's list of mutual respect, seeking to understand each other, seeking to be understood while not demanding that the other person change their mind. Acknowledging each other's points of view, validating each other, seeking to base discussions on agreed upon facts, being open to seeing things differently, to being influenced by each other, common sense, humility, open-mindedness, agreeing to disagree without making each other bad, seeking common ground and common values. And there needs to be a meeting in the middle, I think, if there's two aggrieved parties.
Let's say we were having a discussion with someone in Germany that says that there's no question that the Jews have to be eradicated. See, that's where this becomes a challenge in terms of and how we can bring it to our thing is that when the immigrants were treated in the way they were at the border and you started separating children from families, that became pretty scary to me. I got scared when I saw that. I really did. I got scared because, first of all, there was, and I was very upset with the American Psychological Association that they weren't down there beating pots and pans about the deleterious effects that this was going to have on these.
Yeah, that was traumatic. That was very traumatizing.
The trauma that they've introduced into those kids. I mean, lives. And, and look, some of the kids died because they were in the conditions they were in. It was a bad deal. And I would have a trouble acknowledging anybody and what their values were that would support that kind of an intervention. See, that's the stuff where my limitations show up. Yeah, I can't see it. I just don't see doing that as a great policy in terms of now, if you want to say, hey, maybe we got to pay attention and tighten up our immigration in some way and these kinds of things, but let's not do that to families with kids. I mean, that's my value right there, that I just value that attachment that a kid has to his parents.
I think that you're right. And where do we draw the line on values? Because people do have different values, right? Like around life, there are these right to lifers. They really believe that the human life is so sacred that nobody has the right to do an abortion. That is murder. If you've got a fertilized cell, then it is their value and belief that is murder, and that people should not have a right to murder a child within them. And then on the other hand, you have the value of autonomy and that really that's an individual choice about whether that's murder or not. And so you have one group wanting to impose their values on another.
That's a tough discussion, right? And then you got people that are so extreme about that, they're going to show up and murder a doctor who's doing abortions.
Very, very late term abortion. Yeah. He was 56. This hurts my chest. There are a couple of times in this conversation, I just feel I can, that feeling you get when they're not all the way out, but there are tears right here ready to come out if I need them. It's overwhelming. And that's not, that's, of course it is. We know that, but it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, here we are, hopefully somewhat experts on communication. And what I'm saying, and I don't have a solution to this. I'm saying, I think this is a microcosm of what we see. We have and one of the things I tell people in communication stuff all the time is basically you can't put 8 things out for discussion at one time. Because you're having all kinds of, I don't know how many topics are out here right now in what we're saying. There's way too many. It's like, if we were in a straight ahead work situation, Alan and I just came out of a meeting that was about a publication thing. It's like, we're taking one thing at a time. And if somebody else is overlapping that with this, we're going like, well, wait a minute, we'll talk about that in just a minute. We got to get that because we're going to accomplish things. But this stuff, because it is so emotional and because it is so big, each of us has our perspective on this, and we bring something up, and it's like, I don't know how many topics are out on the table at one time, but it's like, it's not just one topic. And it's like, we're expressing ourselves, but it's like, this is not problem solving.
Yeah, no, that's why I would be interested to hear, like, how did Michael solve, this disagreement with his brother, and how do each of us, what do we bring of our own values to, because solving politics on the grand stage, that's nothing that either of us are cut out to.
Right. We're not going to do that. Yeah.
Right, we're not going to do it, certainly not in this hour, but I
don't know how much more time do we have?
Yeah. Exactly. So how did that work out with your brother, Michael? Did he respond well to your email?
Well, that's interesting. Mark hasn't responded yet. So it'll be interesting to see if there is a response. I put out the invitation to him. And I will keep reaching out. And I've said explicitly to my family, to my parents and my sister, and to Mark, that if we can find a way to come together and to talk about these things in a way that where we follow these principles, maybe that would be one tiny thing that we could do that would help to heal our nation.
Yeah.
And if we can do this in our families, then maybe that would be practice for then being able to do this outside of our families. So yeah, I'll keep you posted.
but look, where I was going to too with this, Patrick, is that not every couple should stay married. Right. That it's okay to say this relationship just doesn't work for me. I mean, I'm not able to be the kind of person to make it work. I'm not saying blame it on the other person. Because I had a lot of trouble with this in rehab, when I saw a patient be brought in the room and being told that, well, you just don't want to get well, instead of the staff saying something like, look, for whatever reason, we're not able to find a way to meet you to help you get motivated enough to turn your life around. So, we're sorry about this, but we just don't have the skill level and the experience and the know-how to help you turn things around. So instead of turning it into that the other person's wrong and bad and shame on you, is to own it, is to just own it. I have this trouble just like Michael does with his brother. My brother is very conservative Christian, big Trumper. Really loved Trump because of his pro-life position and the decisions he's made to put people in different positions in court and stuff like that, judges to rule in that direction. But when I'll try to bring up to him, what do you think about what he's doing with these families down in the border, and there he just can't. He just can't wrap his head around that stuff. And I don't know if we're going to ever be able to heal that part, because we're in such different places. And so it's just like, and I'm just saying, I don't know if I can find a way to be okay with where he's at. And that's not making him wrong. It's just making I have limitations. I couldn't be okay with someone that's saying we've got to, kill millions of Jews. I'm just not going to be able to tolerate that no matter what. That's just something that is so, against my values. And yet I went to Vietnam and I was fighting Viet Cong, and these people didn't do anything to me like that. Muhammad Ali said, they never hurt me. Why do I want to go over there and fight them? But, I was 18 at that time. I'm hopefully a lot more mature at this point in time. Today, I wouldn't go to that war. I'd be a conscientious objector in terms of if Vietnam was on the table.
That's why that's why they took 18-year-olds, right? because of psychological development taught them that these guys you could do this. It's like you don't try to draft a 30-year-old because they're going to actually think for themselves some. But I mean, it reminds me of something that our friend in our meeting, Alan, I'm combining the meeting we just came out of, our friend Vince said about coming when we were talking about the conversation from Thursday night when Michael was talking, is that the challenge there is to come to terms with who we are as individuals, as people. The whole idea of is based on this evil bad kind of that you were talking about, Michael. It's like the idea is when we realize what we're all capable of. It's like now what I'm doing is I'm sitting here and I'm not claiming this is anything other than just saying this is what I'm just. It's almost like we're on some drug and I'm describing you my trip. Okay, this is what I'm seeing. It's like what I'm seeing now is as an entire human race, the things that we begin to be aware of the capacity we have for everything from the most wonderful good to the most horrible bad. And it's like, can we come to terms with that? It's kind of a bad trip.
Yeah. It's so funny. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ken Wilber and spiral dynamics, but I've been very much influenced by his work. And really there gets to a point where in your evolution of your awakening and your spirituality, where you get to a point where you see it's all good. Even the bad is good. And I know that sounds like paradoxical, but like I've struggled with my brother because I work at a state hospital and with people who have murdered and who've raped and who's molested children. I work in a forensic hospital with some pretty destructive people. I mean, and a lot of them are on life sentences. And I was talking to Mark about this, and Mark said, well, really anybody who's on a life sentence should just be murdered. They should be executed. And his reasoning behind that was that it really
more like term abortion.
Well, why should I, as a taxpayer, have to pay to keep these people alive? I don't want to do that. So I find that obviously just my initial reaction to that is just one of I don't agree with that at all. I feel it's callous and really kind of a very, very cruel kind of value to have. But man, that's where he's at, right? And so how do I deal with that? It's like that's where he's at. So I think that I had another patient yesterday who was talking about these kinds of issues, and he was talking about wanting to destroy government because government tries to repress everybody and government's bad and it doesn't do things right, and we need to have no government because government doesn't know how to do anything. And so I would say to my brother and to my patient, it's like, okay, you don't like the way things are. Can we participate creatively together in something that is better rather than hating something that exists? Mm-hmm. Can we creatively create something out of love that is better than what we have? And I think that for myself personally, I don't think I'm going to get anywhere by hating people whose values I find abhorrent. But I think maybe personally for me, I want to dedicate myself to instead, really trying to create something more positive based on more love-based values and putting that out into the world and working for that rather than working against something you find abhorrent.
How do we do that? How can we do that? I think it comes from What About Bob, you know, in the movie, it's baby steps. It's like, that's one of the wisdoms that came from that wonderful, hilarious movie is everything, you know, I use that all the time in therapy. Everything that's worth doing is done in baby steps. I mean, little bitty sometimes. Bringing the, you know, you and I, Alan, talk about the power of lowered expectations. You know, it's like you don't take a flight of steps. You take the first step on the flight.
I think that was one of the things that the founders of our nation tried to get right. Is they said, you know, they were so concerned with this idea of power in any one branch of government wielding too much power, right? Because they saw what happened with the king. And so their vision is what we're kind of talking about, is that can you create a atmosphere, a climate that is going to allow for this kind of a discourse and for people to have all of these different views and ideas and still come together to form a United States, right? See, that was the hope of this country. And I think it's right. I mean, I think that part of that experiment is the right idea, right? And they said, look, it's an experiment. We're not going to get this thing right. But we see things happening, you know, like recently, you know, we've never seen the executive branch take and command the kind of power that Trump did while he was in that presidential position, right? In terms of not complying with subpoenas, making certain decisions that he made. I mean, and even at the end of this thing is that, you know, he violated the one gold standard of this whole thing, which was a peaceful transition of power. That was supposedly the ideal, is that we would have like liberal conservative movements in the government, and these waves would come in and start to balance each other out. But because we had a peaceful transition of power, we kept that movement going in a what we would call a collaborative way, a cooperative way, instead of polarizing and say one's right and one's wrong. And that's where then you're going to grab the power, right? That's when you're going to go ahead and have the coup. That's when you're going to go ahead and try to undo the Constitution, you know, have an insurrection and stuff like that. So at some point you have to say that's wrong, right? That we can't tolerate, right? We've got to stand for our principles here, principles before personalities. We got to say that what we're trying to do is create a situation, a democracy, where what the people say, the majority of the people say, is going to govern this country. And that's where our United States come from.
My answer to Michael's patient who feels pessimistic about government, you know, I want him to get his vaccine. I want his material conditions to be improved. You know, he should have access to health care. He should have dignity, a dignified way of life for everybody across the spectrum. My hope is that, you know, because I actually agree that government as it's presently constituted is extremely dysfunctional and doesn't seem to be lifting many people out of the misery of, you know, the pandemic, you know, these overlapping crises that we're going through. And, you know, there's a Vox article from 2020. The Republican Party took an unusual approach to writing its convention platform for 2020. It decided not to write one. It reused its platform from 4 years ago, which was written before Trump became president. And if you flash forward to today, you know, the group of 10 Republican senators who called on Biden to consider a smaller alternative COVID relief proposal as the administration works to pass the $1.9 trillion package. You know, so 10 Republicans came forward with a counter proposal. 40 remaining senators whose answer to the pandemic is nothing. We're not even going to come to negotiate. We're kind of relinquishing the process of governing at this point. And I think, you know, there's a narrow opportunity these next 2 years for us to deliver on, you know, answer that, you know, question, you know, what does the government do for people?
See, Patrick, I think in one way we can't say, see what I'm thinking about this thing that happened with Marjorie Greene. Is that what her name is?
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes. So that whole thing is that for them to put her in a position of any responsibilities with the position she's taking is an abdication, I think, of saying there has to be some basic standard here. I think what you were saying, Michael, before is if we get rid of disinformation and we say somehow the principle is that we want to base our opinions on some kind of data, on some truth. Now we got a different thing going on than saying, well, I just think it was a conspiracy, this 9/11 stuff, and it never really happened. See, I mean, you could say anything we want to say. We can have any opinion we want, but do we want someone in a position of authority just being able to make up shit as they fly? I don't. I mean, I would want someone to say, I'm going to at least try. I'm going to strive to bring something forward that's based on some kind of reality.
Yeah. But see, that's where, I mean, this is where it's just still hurts my chest because we are really dealing with, and I don't think it's an even split down the middle. I don't think there's 70 million people who are worshiping Donald Trump. I think there's a good number of those people that are just less involved, less concerned about some of these things and not in a different value system in terms of not paying that much attention to the things that we're paying attention to right now. But there are the number of the people that are running this other side of this thing. They really are operating off of, to use Kellyanne Conway's invented term, alternate facts. They have a different world. If you watch the information they have is if they're listening, if they're listening to us, they're going like, these guys are they're not right from the get-go because they don't even know what's going on. And so how do we, so the baby steps thing, the question for me is how do we start in little ways, conversations with people that are just, I don't know, just as, let's go back to the therapy thing. Sometimes I work with somebody in therapy who's so resistant to the process that my only goal for the therapy to begin with is to give them a positive experience in therapy. I don't care if it's going to be, I'm going to be validating to them. I'm very good at entertaining people. I can entertain them. I'll show you fucking card tricks. It's like, I'll do whatever I need to do for that particular person. If it's going to give you a pleasant experience with this process so we can get going. But it's a matter of just where do we even fucking start?
What I want to do intentionally going forward is really change the topic of conversation. Like a lot of these things that people are going back and forth on about, like abortion, for example. I'm really more concerned about equal opportunity. I'm concerned about about access to healthcare for everybody. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned about there being a safety net. I'm concerned about homelessness. I'm concerned about the social injustice. And if there's a way that we can come together, because I think a lot of good, decent people on the left and the right, we all can agree that we should all have an equal opportunity. And we don't have that right now. And we can all agree that it's all good for us to have good health care. So I don't know what you guys think about that, but I think sometimes maybe we should find things to talk about that we all share common values, and then we may have different ideas about how to go about getting it done. And that's where constructive conversation can happen.
All right, well, I think you're more liberal than you think you are.
Maybe I am. Yeah.
I mean, liberals. That's one of those words that it's not a bad word, but it's been made into a bad. That shouldn't be. That's like how did we get the word progressive to be something negative?
Right. I know.
The word is progress.
All right. Well, listen. Fantastic discussion again, as usual.
And we did solve it, right?
Yeah, we're done. Everybody's
when you said that we need both sides of this for the dialogue, and we really do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You gotta have the dialectic in order for
right.
integration. But there is also a way of that dialogue for that to unfold where it's going to lead to an integration. But one of the things I thought about is how we need sometimes that there's this balance going on. This whole idea of the sociobiology, right, that you were talking about, that class you took. I was reading some of Dr. Michael Kerr's work. So he's he's pretty much picked up Dr. Bowen's work on differentiation and has written a book called Family Evaluation. Phenomenal book on differentiation. Probably the best book out there. Michael Kerr, Family Evaluation. So he's talking about this differentiation and is this individuality and separateness, right? In terms of how we need that. He says, is in an ant colony, he goes, there's a very interesting dynamic that takes place. Let's say this ant colony was in conflict with another colony and they lost a bunch of warriors before. Well, somehow the society's need to have more warrior ants produced gets somehow communicated to the queens genetically, and they produce an aberrant amount of warrior ants now to balance what the community needs out. When I read that, I go, oh my God, this is fascinating that there's something at work here that's beyond anything I could imagine. That somehow these needs are being communicated genetically. And is that happening in our evolution? Are we communicating the strife that's going on now? And are we communicating that to the children to come in the future? And they're going to have more ability than we have to deal with this. I only hope so.
Amen.
There may be a force going on here that's bigger than any of us can imagine, and that we may be creating generations to come that are going to have wired into them from the sociobiology an ability to enter into these dialogues better than we can.
Beautiful concept. That's so inspiring.
Thank you for being here with us, Michael.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah.
All right, take care.
It's a spiral, not a circle. Goes round, round, round. Look for solutions, be your own friend. Never say never in either direction. Look in the mirror, trust the reflection. Deep in your heart, start right here. That's where it starts. Right here. Won't you look to your heart? It's all